Now we continue to discuss about where the self notion originates. It means that well, we establish our concept of I or the Atma, where the Atma is established. And in our last talk, we have introduced that when we have the concept of I or the self or atom, then it should have the support, something to support the idea or the concept of atta. And the most intimate support are our five khandhas, our rupa, vedana, sanya, samkhara, and vijnana. These five khandhas made up of our body and our life or the personality. If, for example, someone assumes materiality, the first aggregate to be the self, such an assumption would manifest in four ways. First, materiality is the same as the self. Second, the self possesses materiality. Third, materiality is within the self. Or four, the self is in materiality. A further elaboration of this fourfold manifestation of the self-notion takes the following form. In this paragraph, the explanation of non-self is the same as in Chinese Buddhism. In the Agama Sutra, the Buddha always told his disciples that the rupa or the materiality or our physical body is not the self. And the physical body or rupa, materiality, is not the possession of the self, of I. It is not my physical body. And the third, the Buddha say, within our body, there is no self, there is no atta, there is no soul. And the fourth, the Buddha say, that our physical body or the rupa is not within the big atta. The big atta refers to the Brahma or the soul or the creator God. The explanation is totally the same as the Chinese Buddhism. Here we see the similarity between the Theravada Buddhism and the Chinese Buddhism. The Buddha continues to explain why we have this fourfold manifestation of the concept of atta, the self-notion. Then the Buddha explained as following. The first one, how does he see materiality as self? If just as if a man saw a lightning frame and the odor, color, and the color as identical, thus what the frame is, that the color is, what the color is, that the frame is. This is just as a man, a person, when he saw a lighted frames, names, frame, the color as identical. This person believes that the lighting names frame is the same as the color. For example, the red color of the lighting names frame. He identifies the lighting names frame is red color. Then think in other words, red color is the frame, but actually it is not this way. Lighting names frame is dependent originated, and the color, for example, the red color is also dependent originated. Why we believe that this is the red color? It is dependent originated on many factors, on many conditions. This is the false negation that the materiality is not the self, is not the atta. Also, rupa is anatta. The second elaboration. How does he see self as possessed of materiality? It means that the body is mine. I have this body, atta, the self or I. I have this body. Just as if there were a tree possessed of shade, such that a man might say, this is the tree, this is the shade. The tree is one, the shadow another, but this tree is possessed of this shade in virtue of this shade. It means actually that a tree is not identical with the shade, but this person believes a tree possessed of the shade. Then he said, this is the tree, that is the shade. The tree and the shadow are different, but the tree is the owner of the shade. The shade belongs to the tree. Actually, according to the principle of dependent origination, the trees is dependent originated, and the shade is also dependent originated. If there is no light, then there will be no shade. The shade is not the belongings of the tree. In the same case, our body is not the possession of atta or self. Our body is dependent originated. And the idea of self is ignorant. There is no self at all. There is no soul. There is no everlasting identity or agent within our body. The concept of atta or self is also an ignorance. The third point, how does he see materiality in self? Just as if there were a sandy floor, such that a man might say, this is the floor, this is the sand, The flower is one, the scent another, but the scent is in this flower. Most flowers have scent. Then this ignorant person might say the flower and the scent are different. But within the flower, there is the scent. It means this person misunderstands that materiality of our physical body is within the soul or within the big I or Atta. For example, our physical body is the possession of the Creator God. And in Buddhism, this is not the case. The fourth, how does he see himself in materiality? Just as if a gem were placed in a casket, such that a person might say, this is the gem, this is the casket. The gem is one, the casket another. But this gem is in the casket. When we put a gem in a casket, if we are ignorant, we might say that within the casket, there's a gem, there's a pearl. So the gem and the casket are different, but the gem is in the casket. In this way, the ignorant person might think that within our physical body, there is a soul, there is an Atta. From these four classifications, we understand that the first one, materiality, the same as the self. However, the second, third, and the fourth refer to the assumption that the physical body and the self are different. In the second case, the Atta is the owner of the physical body. The soul is the owner of the physical body. And in the third case, within physical body, there is an Atta, there is a soul. And the fourth case is the self is within the physical body. The second, third, and the fourth believe that the physical body is different from the self. However, they have the different misunderstanding between the relationship of the self and the physical body. And according to Buddha's teaching, all are dependent originated. There's no soul at all. There are only 5 aggregates, but there's no soul at all. And the soul here means everlasting identity. We know that the 5 aggregates are changing all the time. there is no everlasting identity or entity of the five aggregates. The same goes for the other four aggregates. The other four aggregates are Vedana, the feeling, Sanya, thought, thinking, perception, Samkhara, volitional construction, and consciousness. The other four aggregates can be explained in the same way as the physical body, the rupa. The same goes for the other four aggregates. Thus, there are in all 20 possible relations between the five aggregates and the hypothetical self. Hypothetical means assume. The ignorant people assume that there is a self, whether it is identical with the five aggregates or it is different from the five aggregates. In total, there are 20 possible relations. This is how Buddhism explains what is called the origin of the belief in a self-entity. A self-entity means atta, or the soul, everlasting entity, everlasting identity. The belief in a self-entity comes from the misunderstanding of the five aggregates as everlasting, but all phenomena, all things are dependent originated. They are changing all the time. So there's no self-entity at all. There's no self-entity. There's no identity at all. There are only dependent origination. Because of this, so that the Buddhist teaching on Downcell is intended as a remedy for the cessation of this belief, the belief in a self-entity. The cessation of this belief is to be achieved through the opposite process, that is, by negating each aggregate as a self-entity so as to eliminate all possibilities for the emergence of the self-view, the final conclusion of this process of negation is that none of the five aggregates that make up the individuality can be identified as one's self. The Buddhist teaching on Downcell in Theravada teaching or in Agama or Nikaya teachings, Downcell is the most important truth. In Mahayana Buddhism, we call Downcell as emptiness or shunyata, but in Pali it is called sunya. Sunya means non-self. The Buddhist teaching on non-self is intended why the Buddha promoted the teachings of non-self. The purpose is a remedy for the cessation of this belief. A remedy means to provide a correct understanding of the five aggregates as Downcell, to cease this belief, the belief in a self-entity. If we have the self in a self-entity, then we grasp whatever we have. We may grasp our 5 aggregates or anything within our experience. However, everything is changing all the time. We cannot grasp anything. If we grasp at anything, then we will feel uneasy. The suffering will arise. The cessation of this belief is to be achieved through the opposite process. How to cease this wrong belief? The method is by negating, refuting, each aggregate as a self-entity. How to negate each aggregate as a self-entity? We may analyze our 5 aggregates when our mind is concentrated, when we practice samatha, then our mind will come down. In that state, we can analyze, is there any everlasting aggregate within our personality? And we will find, no, our physical body is changing all the time. Our sensation, perception, volitional, consciousness, and even the consciousness, all of them are changing all the time. Then we negate the misbelief that each aggregate as a self-entity, so as to eliminate all possibilities. There is no possibility at all for the arising of the self-view. This is the anatta or Downcell. The final conclusion of this process of negation is that none of the 5 aggregates that make up the empiric individuality. Empiric individuality means our personality or our existence. We exist in our experience because we have the citta, we have the mana, we have the vijnana.
It's like you don't want to talk. If you mute it there, they won't know that you have to.
We have the heart, we have the mind, so we have the discrimination of the external surroundings, and we grasp at the idea of the soul, the idea of the everlasting entity. If each aggregate is not the self, then can their combination provide a collective basis for the self-notion? As we may find in the Nikaya or in the Agama Sutra, that the Buddha analyzed one by one. At first, the Buddha will analyze that the physical body is not the self. The physical body is not the position of the self. And within the physical body, there's no self. And within the physical body is not within the soul, the self. There is no self at all. And then the Buddha will analyze one by one the Vedana, Sanya, Samkara, and the Vijnana. In this connection, what we need to remember here is that although Buddhism analyzes the different being into several aggregates, it does not say that they just lump together to form the individual, just as a random collection of bricks is not a wall. In this connection, at this point, we have to remember, although the Buddha analyzed the different being into 5 aggregates, it does not mean that the lump together. The lump together means to put the 5 aggregates together, then we can have an individual. It is not this way. It means that the 5 aggregates are organic. They have interrelation among them. They are connected to one another. They are closely related. They are not isolated. Just as a random collection of bricks is not a wall. We cannot say a wall is made up of, for example, 100 pieces of brick. No, we should put the cement. We should have a worker to use the cement to connect the brick together in a certain way that we can have a wall created. A random collection of bricks is not a soul, it's not a wall. It means only the collection of the 5 aggregates is not a person, is not an individual. They should have close connection among them. This is the so-called the function of the mind, the grasping of the mind to put them together. The individual is the sum total of the 5 aggregates when they are structurally organized according to the principle of dependent arising. Pancha Upatana Khanda Paticca Samuppannya. Pancha means 5. Upata means cleaning or attachment. Khanda aggregates. Paticca Samuppannya, dependent arising. The individual is the sum total. The sum total means to put together as one unit of the 5 aggregates. When they are structurally organized, they are structurally organized. They are not random collection, but they are structurally organized according to the principle of dependent arising. Then we may ask, how the 5 aggregates are structurally organized according to the principle of dependent arising. We may analyze where does our physical body come from? Our physical body comes from the embryo of the first moment of this life, when our consciousness comes into the combination of the father and the mother's eggs and the sperm. When the consciousness enters it, this is the very first beginning of our physical body. And then the embryo will develop gradually. And finally, we have the physical body and other sensation, perception, volitional construction, and consciousness. And where does our sensation come from? Our sensation comes from consciousness. Then we may ask, where does the consciousness come from? The consciousness comes from the contact of the sense organ and the external object. For example, we have the eye organ and the visible object. When they meet together and have other conditions, then our visible or eye consciousness will arise. And after the arising of our eye consciousness, our mental consciousness will arise. When our mental consciousness arises, then we have the feeling of Vedana. And after we have the feeling, we have perception. Perception means sanya. And after the perception, we will make a decision to obtain something or to reject something. That is the samkhara. And after the arising of our Vedana, Sanya, and the samkhara, then we have the imprints in our subconsciousness or unconsciously. We call it mano. Mano is the indriya or the root of our mental consciousness. In Theravadan Buddhism, the so-called mental root means mano. We call it mano. Mano means the previous idea, the previous thought. The previous thought will induce the next thought. We call it the mano. Therefore, these 5 aggregates are structurally organized. Structurally organized means that they are closely connected. They belong to a sum total of personality according to the principle of dependent arising. All the 5 aggregates arise by means of other conditions. It is dependent arising that ensures causal continuity and interdependent functioning. This is this principle. The principle of dependent arising ensures means to make sure causal continuity. A causal continuity means we have the causes, then we will have the effect, and that the effect will be the causes of next effect. It is a continuity. It is a continuity of the cause or the conditions and the effect. And the dependent functioning, interdependent functioning, it means that each aggregate depends on other four aggregates. They function together. They are not functioning one by one, but they are functioning together. The individual is, in fact, defined as the aggregation, sangaha, collocation, samipata, and the coming together, samavaya, of the five aggregates of cleaning. So here, this word cleaning is very important. Cleaning means the upadana. The upadana means cleaning, because there is the cleaning that the five aggregates function interdependently together at the same time. So here we have the key of getting liberation or attaining Nirvana. The key to attain Nirvana is to end cleaning. If we don't cling to anything, then we are liberated. That is the state of Nibbana. But because we cling to anything, or we grasp at anything, then actually there is no relation between us and anything else. Just because of our clinging, then we have the relation, then we are bound together. We are not free. We are under pressure. And the individual is defined as the aggregation, correlation, and the coming together of the five aggregates of cleaning. Here, the most important word is cleaning. If there's no cleaning, then there are only the five aggregates. Then this person are liberated because this person doesn't cling to anything else. He is in the state of Nibbana. What Buddhism denies is not the concept of the person, Pagara, but a self-subsistent entity within the person. When we say that our five aggregates are non-self, some people may be afraid of hearing this truth. It is because they misunderstand that the non-self means no existence of the personality. No. What Buddhism denies is not the concept of the person, Pagara, the concept of the person. The person is called Pagara. Pagara means the person, but the person may have different existence in this life and the next life and the future life or past life. The existence is in different realm of samsara. Buddhism accepts the concept of the person, but Buddhism doesn't accept the idea that within the five aggregates, there is a self-subsistent entity. Self-subsistent entity means the atta or the soul. It is self-subsistent. It means that it exists by itself. It depends on nothing else. It exists from the very beginning of our existence and will last forever. However, Buddha analyzed that within the five aggregates, there is no self-subsistent entity. As such, Buddhism has no objection to the concept of personhood, if by person is understood not an entity distinct from the sum total of the properly organized five aggregates, nor is substance enduring in time or an agent within the five aggregates. Buddhism believe that there is no soul, no self-existent entity within the five aggregates. Therefore, Buddhism doesn't deny the concept of personhood. We should not say because of the Buddha Dharma belief in non-self or anatta. Therefore, there's no existence of I or you or five aggregates. No. Buddhism accepts the concept of personhood. But this personhood should be understood as not an entity. It is only an organic structure of the five aggregates only. And this personhood should be not understood as a substance enduring in time. A substance enduring in time means everlasting. No an agent within the five aggregates. There is no agent. It means there is no power which directs the function of the five aggregates. There is no soul or nothing else which can control the function of the five aggregates. No, not at all. The five aggregates are functioning according to the dependent origination. It means, as we explained already, consciousness, vinaya, depends on Namarupa. And that Namarupa depends on consciousness. They are reciprocally related. One, vinaya or consciousness is the condition of the materiality, the mentality, and vice versa. Materiality, mentality is the condition of the vinaya, the consciousness. The person is the sum total of the five aggregates combined according to the principle of dependent arising, which are constantly in a state of flux. From the viewpoint of Buddha Dharma, the so-called personhood, the person or an individual In the sum total is the together of the five aggregates according to the principle of dependent arising, not according to the control of a certain element or the direction of a super God or everlasting agent within the five aggregates. No, there's no controlling power to direct the function of the five aggregates. The five aggregates are combined together according to the principle of dependent arising. And the controlling force is the so-called cleaning, upadana, because of upadana, because of our cleaning, that we put the five aggregates together to form the personhood or personality. It is because of the cleaning, upadana. And the cleaning comes from the craving, and the craving comes from the contact. And why, when we have the contact, we will arise the craving or hatred? It's because of our ignorance. We are ignorant of anatta. We are ignorant of the non-self. We don't understand that the five aggregates are interdependently originated. There is no driving force. There is no agent. There is no controller either within the five aggregates or beyond the five aggregates. No other force to drive, to direct, or to control our five aggregates. It is only our cleaning. And the cleaning comes from our craving, and the craving comes from our contact, and so on. The origin of the craving is ignorance, because we don't have the wisdom to analyze that actually there's no self, there's no soul, there's no controlling force, there's no driving force except the dependent origination. And the five aggregates are constantly in a state of flux. It means that the five aggregates are changing all the time. What really matters here is not how one tries to understand the nature of the five aggregates in their combination. Rather, what really matters is the fact that even the combination is in a state of constant flux. What is in constant flux is not under one's control, and hence is non-self. At this point, what really matters is the fact that even the combination of the five aggregates are changing all the time. Each aggregate is changing all the time. And even the five aggregates are put together, they are still changing all the time. It is in a state of constant flux, just like a flowing river. It is flowing all the time. What is in constant flux is not under our control. We cannot control the constant flux. And hence, the constant flux means non-self, no everlasting agent or identity. Downcell from another perspective. From the above explanation, we have the explanation from the viewpoint of dependent arising. And then we have another viewpoint, that is from the viewpoint of nutriment or ahara impari. Since non-self means absence of intrinsic reality and substantial being, the idea of non-self comes into focus from another perspective, from the perspective of the Buddhist teaching on nutriment. Okay. Because non-self means no intrinsic reality. Intrinsic reality means naturally there is a everlasting identity. Intrinsic means of the internal substance and a substantial being. There is no substantial being. Then from this viewpoint, we will ask, why there is no substantial being? Why there is no intrinsic reality? Because the reality and the being should depend on something to support their existence. And the support here means nutriment. Nutriment, the Buddhist teaching on nutriment. Nutriment, we may call it the food to support the existence of our individuality. All living beings, the Buddha says, subsist on food. The Buddha says, all living beings subsist on food. It means if we exist, it is because we depend on food. If we have no food, we have no nutriment, then we cannot exist. We will die, we will disappear just because of the lack of nutriment. Sabbe satta aharatitikka. Sabbe means all. Satta means the different beings. All different beings. Ahara means food or nutriment. Atitikka means subsist on or relies on. For example, our physical body relies on food and drinking water. If there is no food, there is no water to drink, then we will die. In the same case, all different beings depends on food, depends on nutriment. If there is no food, then there will be no different beings. By food, Buddhism means not only what we eat and drink, for the sustenance of our physical body, which is called cell-made food, kapalikara, ahara, but also three other kinds, namely sensory contact, phasa, mental volition, mano sancitana, and consciousness, vijnana. All different beings subsist on food. And here the food is not only the physical food. The physical food is called motion made food. Motion means very little, very little thing. For example, the rice, the wheat, or the fruit, piece by piece. Motion made food. Kaparic kara. Kara means made. Kaparic means little. Motion food, made food. Ahara means food. In total, in Buddhism, we have 4 kinds of food. The first one is the kaparikara ahara. And the second food is sensory contact. Sensory contact means phassa. And in Buddhist term, phassa, or the sensory contact, means when our 5 organs connects or cleaves to the 5 objects, then the 5 consciousness will arise. The 5 consciousness will arise because of the mental consciousness arise. In Mahayana Buddhism, we have 8 kinds of consciousness, but in early Buddhism, whether in Theravadan Buddhism or Northern Chinese Buddhism, we have 5 consciousness, 5, excuse me, we have 6. We have 6 kinds of consciousness. However, their essence or their substance is only one. In Mahayana Buddhism, we have 8 kinds of consciousness. But in early Buddhism, the consciousness is only one in essence. This one consciousness may have 6 kinds of function. So there's only one consciousness, but this one consciousness has 6 kinds of function. We have the vijnana, or the consciousness first. Rather than it can have different function of seeing something, or hearing sound, or smelling, tasting, or touching, or even our thinking. But the consciousness is only one. One consciousness has 6 kinds of function. It is different. Contact, phassa. The teaching in early Buddhism is different from that of the Mahayana Buddhism. Phassa. Phassa means the combination of the physical sense organs and the physical objects and the 5 kinds of consciousness. And the 5 kinds of consciousness comes from the mental consciousness. And the mental consciousness comes from mano. Mano is the root of the mental consciousness. This is the sensory contact, phassa. Mental volition, mano Sanchatana, Mano. Mano is the root of the consciousness, mental volition. It means mental volition means the willing or the wish or the desire to cling to something or to eject something. It is the decision of the mind. Mano Sanchatana. And the consciousness, Vijnana. Vijnana is the root of the sensory contact and the mental volition. We have 4 kinds of ahara or nutriment in Buddhism. As to sensory contact, there are 6 kinds: eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, and the mind contact. We have the so-called organ, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and the body are the physical organs. However, the mental organ is called mano. It's called mano. When the mental organ or the mano has its object, we call it the dharma. Then the mental consciousness arises. We have 6 kinds of contact, and these 6 kinds of contact will naturally goes to the next step of sensation. It is through these 6 sensory contacts that our 6 sense faculties partake of food. Partake of food means eat food, just like we use our mouths to eat something or to drink water. These 6 faculties partake of food through these 6 sensory contacts. If there is no contact, then there will be no ahara or food or nutrients. What is visible is food for the eye. What is audible is food for the ear and so on. What is visible, that means the visible object, for example, an apple or a computer or someone, they are called visible object. Visible object is the food for the eye. It means if we don't use our eyes to see anything, then the functioning of our eye will decrease and at last will stop. What is audible means the sound. The sound is the food for the ear. Therefore, we like to listen to music. We don't like the noise because the music, the melody will substance our ear to make us feel happy and peaceful and so on. If not for this kind of food, our sensory apparatus will suffer starvation and thereby not function at all. Sensory apparatus means our sensory organs, and our sensory organs includes the visible organs and the so-called the nerve system. In modern science, the nerve system in modern medicine. If we don't eat the contact pasta, if we don't eat the contact food, the mental volitional food, and the consciousness food, then we will die. If we don't have the sensory contact, we don't take the sensory objects, then our sense organs will stop and will no more function at all. The third kind of food, which is the mental volition, is the cognitive or motivating upset. The third kind of food is called Mado Satadana. The Mado Satadana is the cognitive or motivative aspect of our mind. Cognitive means of the cognition. If we want to understand something, if we want to realize what is something, then we have the cognition. And the cognition is a process of understanding what is the object or motivating aspect of our mind. Motivating that means the driving force of our existence. If we don't have the motivation to exist, then we will die. It is the most dynamic indeed, the will to live. It means that the third ahara, Mado Sanchetana, is the most dynamic. It means that it is the strongest power of our existence. If we don't have the mental volition to live, then we will die. The first kind of food, which is consciousness or vijnana ahara, has to be understood in the context of the samsaric process, the cycle of birth and death. The fourth food, vijnana consciousness, should be understood in the context or in the 12 link factors of samsara. It is the third factor of the 12 links of conditions. The first one is ignorance, avidya, or ignorance. And the second one is volitional action. And then we have the consciousness. The consciousness here means the relinking consciousness between two lives. The previous life and this life, the connection is the consciousness or the vijnana ahara. If there is no vijnana ahara, then there is no new birth. The samsara will stop. The cycle of birth and death. It means after a person dies, it is the vijnana or consciousness nutriment, ahara, to have a new birth of next life. Although consciousness does not migrate from birth to birth, as we saw in the previous chapter, it functions as a condition in the 12-factor formula of dependent arising. It means that there is no consciousness comes from previous life to this life, and it comes from this life to next life. From both to both, there is no consciousness travel between two lives. There is no consciousness. As we saw in the previous chapter, there is only the principle of dependent arising. There is nothing which can be called as consciousness or an entity. We can call it as consciousness, which travels from the previous life to the next life. No. If we think that there is a consciousness travels from previous life to this life, it is a misunderstanding of the dependent origination or arising. However, in Mahayana Buddhism, we have the so-called Alaya consciousness, which is the storehouse of the habitual tendencies of previous life, and which will come from the previous life to the next life. But we have to understand that the Alaya consciousness is not an atta. It is not an everlasting or unchanged agent. No, it is changing all the time. And there is no identity, there's no entity of the Alaya consciousness. Alaya consciousness is nothing but the collection of our habitual tendencies. And our habitual tendencies come from our volitional construction. And our volitional construction, or we call it the samkhara, is changing all the time. Therefore, there is no unchanged Alaya consciousness. We will understand that we cannot say that there is something which can carry the habitual tendency of the previous life to the next life. No, it is just like a flowing water. It is in a constant flux. Our Alaya consciousness is in the same case. It is just like a flux. It is changing all the time. There is no atta, there is no self, there is no entity at all. Our consciousness is only a skillful means to explain why we will have the effect of what we did in the past. The consciousness or the vijnana ahara should be understood between two lives. It is mainly this factor that function as food, nutriment for the samsaric dimension of individual existence. So it is the vijnana ahara, or the consciousness nutriment. This is the factor to have the samsaric or the rebirth again and again. And we have to understand that the so-called vijnana ahara is not independent, because the so-called vijnana or the consciousness nutriment depends on the so-called volitional construction, or depends on the so-called samkhara. The samkhara depends on some jinya, or the mental consciousness. They are interdependent on one another. There's no independent vinyanya ahara. The consciousness nutriment means the habitual tendency. And the habitual tendencies comes from the volitional construction, or the motivation, or the discrimination of our mind consciousness. Individual existence thus turns out to be a process of nutriment, a process of alimentation. It is kept going by 4 kinds of food. If there were a static self-entity within the empiric individuality, then it would not be necessary to keep it going by 4 kinds of food. It is just like a burning fire, a dynamic process with no static entity in it. A fire cannot go on burning without being supplied by fuel. Okay, as a summary of this paragraph, individual existence, or the personhood, or just like our existence, our human being. Thus, individual existence thus turns out to be a process of nutriment. A process means that it is going all the time. A process of nutriment, a process of alimentation. It means that we have to take these 4 kinds of nutriments in order to support our existence. If we don't take these 4 kinds of nutriment, then we cannot exist at all. We will die. It means that we will stop the samsara, that we attain the Nirvana. It is kept going. The samsara is kept going. Our physical existence is going all the time by 4 kinds of food, by 4 kinds of food. Now, if there were a static self-entity within the empiric individuality, it means that if there is a soul, if there is an altar within our personality, the altar or the self means that it can support itself. It depends on nothing else. If it is the case that we don't need to take the 4 kinds of nutrients, because it can subsist, it can survive by itself. However, because of the 4 kinds of nutrients, we can exist. If there are no 4 kinds of nutrients, then our samsara stop. Our samsara stop means that we attain the Nirvana. And actually, this is the goal of the Buddha Dharma, to attain Nirvana. It is just like a burning fire. A burning fire is a dynamic process. It's a dynamic process because it is burning all the time with no static entity in it. in the polling file. The polling file, the frame is changing all the time because the dependent origination of the polling file, the frame is changing all the time. It is a dynamic process with no static entity. With no static entity, it means that nothing exists forever within a polling file. A polling file, we should have the oxygen, we should have the fuel, and we should have a dry wood, and so on. A polling file depends on so many factors. It is not a static entity. It is changing all the time. If there is no more any condition to make the wood burning, then the fire will extinguish. There's no more fire. How the self-notion emerges, how the self-notion arises. As the Buddha says, the notion of the self does not occur to a young, tender infant lying prone on its back. Such an infant has only a latent tendency to the self-view. As the Buddha says, a baby has no notion of the self, but why? When an infant grows to 3 or 4 years, then the concept of I, the concept of the self will appear. It is because this infant, this baby, has a latent tendency. A latent tendency means that there is a substream within the consciousness, and we call it mano. There is a latent tendency to the self-view. Because of lack of the conditions to make this latent tendency to appear to the concept of self, just because there's a lack of the conditions. If the conditions are put together, then the latent tendency of the self-view will emerge, will appear in the mind of a small child of 3 or 4 years old. The emergence of the self-view can, however, be traced to the cognitive process, the process through which we cognize sense object. The origin of the self-view or the concepts of I can be traced back. We can trace where does the self-view or the concept of self arise. It arises from the cognitive process, the process through which we cognize sense objects. The cognition is a process of understanding or feeling the existence of sense objects. In every cognitive act, an act consisting of a series of cognitive events, the latent tendency for the ego consciousness awakens and gradually solidifies eventually becoming fully crystallized at the final stage called conceptual proliferation, papancha. Cognition is a process. It's a process, and it is a series of cognitive events. According to modern medicine, when our nerve is affected by anything else, then it will emit those so-called electricity that motivate or activate our cognition. And gradually, the latent tendency of the self-view for the ego consciousness awakens. It means that a small infant doesn't have the notion of the self, but when he grows up, when he starts to cognize the external objects, the external object maybe his parents or the food or anything else, when he starts to cognize the external object in the process of condition, then his latent tendency or the habitual tendency of the I or the self-consciousness will be awakened because he starts to cognize something else. And in his past life, he had the habitual tendency or latent tendency of the self-consciousness. The self-consciousness will awaken and gradually solidify, eventually becoming fully crystallized at the final stage. That's called conceptual proliferation. Proliferation. Proliferation, that means a series of thinking. A series of thinking or a series of cognition. And then his tendency of the self-view should have some support. Otherwise, he cannot have the self-view. When the conceptual proliferation or papancha means to have a series of wandering thoughts, or it can be also explained as the discrimination, not the understanding of non-ego, the arising of the thought of the I, the self idea. Once the ego consciousness or the self concept or the self view has arisen, it cannot exist in a vacuum. It cannot exist in a vacuum. Just like we can exist in the space, we should have some support. The ego consciousness needs ontological support. Ontological means something existent, substantial support for the ego consciousness to reside on. It needs concrete form and contact for the ego consciousness to exists. What the enlightened ordinary person does in this regard is identifies the ego consciousness with one or more of the five aggregates in which individual existence is resolved. An enlightened ordinary being, it means that in general, all the ordinary persons have no wisdom of the Buddha Dharma of the Downcell. Is identifies here, please correct, please change, identifies to identification of, is the identification or to identify the ego consciousness with one or more of the five aggregates into which individual existence is resolved. It means that individual existence is nothing but the organic combination of the five aggregates. So when a small child ego consciousness awakens, his ego consciousness or the self-view should identify with one or more of his five aggregates. Otherwise, there is no place to establish the ego consciousness. For example, we cannot build a house in the space. We have to build it on the ground. We cannot fly in the sky. Even a bird flies in the sky, but it cannot always fly in the sky, space, or in the sky. It should float down to reside on the ground or on the trees. So nothing can exist in the space. Only the ground can be the foundation of the existence. The five aggregates are the foundation for the self-view or the ego consciousness to establish. This process of identification takes the following forms. The process of identification of a person with the five aggregates are in four forms. For example, this is mine. The body is mine. This is my body. This is my feeling. This is my perception. This is my volitional construction. Itam mama. And this I am. This I am. It means that I am this body. I am this sense. Esoham asmi. This is myself. Esome atta. This is myself. The five aggregates of myself, or any of the five aggregates, is myself. In this form, this process of identification makes the concept of ego or self to have some place to establish. Here, the first form is due to craving, tanha. This is mine. It is because of our habitual tendency of craving or our desire, tanha. We try to earn something. So we try to earn the physical body or the sensation, feeling, perception, volitional construction, and so on. The second, this I am, is because of the conceit, mana. The concept means the misbelief of an entity, or the wrong view of I, the wrong view of self, the wrong view of an entity, an everlasting soul, we call mana. Mana can be also say manos. And the third, this is myself, because of the view, ditti, view. Ditti means any discrimination or our view. We cling to our view. Therefore, we will have the arising of the self-consciousness, craving, conceit, and the view are thus three different aspects of the ego consciousness. And just because of craving, conceit, and the view, we are reborn again and again. That we are caught in samsara because we have the craving. And the craving comes from the idea of I or atta or self, because when we have the concept of I or self, then we want to survive. Then we should have something, some food to support our surviving. Craving comes from conceit, and the conceit comes from wrong view. Why we have the view of I or self or soul? It is because of our ignorance. We don't know the reality of the five aggregates are nothing but the phenomena of dependent origination. And the so-called I is nothing but the organic combination of the five aggregates. So when we have ignorance, when we have the wrong view, then we will believe that there is I, there is soul, there is everlasting entity within our five aggregates. And because of the concept of the I, we want to survive, then we have to crave something in order to take the food to support the existence of our five aggregates. Craving, concept, and view are in the change of dependent origination. And we can trace the origination to view. A view here means the wrong view or the ignorance of the reality of our existence. The three different aspects of the ego consciousness are craving, conceit, and view. If we want to attain Nirvana, then we should have the right view. And the right view is the first factor of the Eightfold Noble Path. The Eightfold Noble Path, the first one is right view. If we don't have the right view, then we will have the concept of I or self. And then, in order to make ourselves survive, we have to take food. Now, we have to take food, then we will have the craving to take something in order to support our existence. Therefore, the right view is the most important thing. in Buddha Dharma, we always stress that we have to understand clearly what is the Four Noble Truths, what is the Buddha Dharma. If we don't have the right understanding of the Buddha Dharma, any practice of the meditation or samatha vipassana will go astray. The fourth noble truth is right view. Right view is stressed again and again. Any comment from you or question from you?
Yeah, Professor.
Yes, Professor
Yes,
Huang.
Yes.
Yes.
From today's lesson, at first I thought, since people must exist with all four kinds of foods or nutriment, then how can we get out of the process, the samsaric process, if we want to exist? Then I thought maybe, I don't know whether it's right. Then I thought maybe the point is not the support of our existence, or the problem is not from the nutriment or the fruits, but from our attitude toward these foods. And later I heard, Professor, you mentioned that we should have the right view. We should not consider all these four kinds of foods as I or myself. Maybe that's a way to get out of the samsaric process. I don't know whether it's right. So that's my question.
Yes. So if we don't rely on these four kinds of ahara or nutrients, we will be liberated. That means that we have the wisdom to understand that we have the five aggregates, but we don't cling to the five aggregates as real. The five aggregates are nothing but the result of the dependent origination. We take these four kinds of food with the wisdom of dependent arising. Just because we want to learn Buddha Dharma, the practice Buddha Dharma, and to help other beings to bring peace to the whole world. It is our wisdom that we don't cling to any kind of the foods, then we are liberated. We exist, but we will not suffer anymore. Although we may have the physical pain, but our mind is free, our mind is peaceful. We understand that our physical body will get old, will age, and will get sick, and someday our physical body will collapse. We don't cling to the real existence of our physical body. It is only a process of taking food when we are liberated. And we call it, we should have the panya, we should have the samadhi, and we should have the sati, we should have the will to learn and practice Buddha Dharma, and we should have the food of liberation. In short, we should have the wisdom, we should have the right view that everything is dependent origination. Nothing is an entity. So we may have the existence of the five aggregates, but we don't cling to the reality of our five aggregates. We just relied on the 5 aggregates to learn Buddha Dharma, to practice Buddha Dharma, and to serve other people. Okay, thank you,
Yes, thank you.
Professor Huang. Any more comment?
Professor Chen, so far no comments from the students. So I think, thank you, Professor Chen, for the detailed exposition and discussion today of impermanence, suffering, and non-self in the 4th chapter of the written book on early Buddhist teaching, middle position in theory and practice. Before we end this online Dharma session, dear fellow class members, once again, please turn on our video cameras and let us put our palms together. Let us listen and repeat after Professor Chen as we invite the professor to lead the class in the dedication of merits. Professor Chen, please.
Join our palms together. May all sentient beings be well and happy.
May all sentient beings be well and happy.
May all sentient beings have the right view of non-ego.
May all sentient
beings
beings
have
have
the
the
right
right
view
view
of
of
non-ego.
non-ego.
May the world be peaceful.
May the world be peaceful.
Thank you, Lord, Brother Dan, and other friends online. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Namo Amitabha. Dear fellow class members, please continue to put our palms together. In gratitude and with great appreciation, please give one bow to the professor and Dharma teacher. Thank you, Professor Chen, once again. Thank you. See you again at the next online Dharma session.
Thank you.
Namo
Others are-
Amitabha. Thanks.
and other friends,
Bye.
brothers and sisters in the Dharma. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.